Welcome, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Daniel, Vice Strategic Partnerships at Telmar, and I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team that work with me on these webinars. Elke Casserole in the Netherlands, our Product Marketing Manager, and Marsha Swart, our Regional Sales Director in good old South Africa. They'll be doing the follow-up with you after this webinar, and we'll share the recording, the deck, as well as an offer to demo our insights and statistical packages with BrandMapp data. So the purpose of having these data webinars is really to showcase the many data sets we load around the world. We load over 10,000 data sets in 85 countries. And because we're data neutral, what this means for our users is that they can get faster, deeper, more meaningful insights in a one software solution. So thank you very much for joining this, our second in our series of BrandMapp webinars. It's called Inside the Hearts and Minds of Your Consumers. Welcome to the Wi-Fi team. Stuart Lowe, Director, Brandon de Kock, Director of Storytelling, and Julie Ann Bell, Business Development Director. Any questions you have, please put them on the chat line and we'll address them after the presentation. Brandon is going to take us on another journey today to explore the nuggets in this really extensive data set. So looking forward to another colorful presentation. Over to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you for having me as always, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. It's always fun to see. I'm sorry if I didn't dress up on purpose like this. I just realized looking at myself that I might resemble the commander from A Handmaid's Tale, the old grey-haired one. I'm sorry if I do, but it's damn cold here in Cape Town. So yeah, welcome. I'm just going to switch onto my second screen here so that you can see my the slides. Hopefully you can all see that. So for those of you that were with the last one, you might I'm just going to have to cover some ground here just to set the scene. For those who don't know who we are, my partners Stuart and Jules and I, we've been on this journey for about the last 10 years. We are not really a research company per se. We're actually a consumer insights consultancy, but we underpin everything we do with this beautiful piece of work that's become an annual piece of work called BrandMapp. So what it is, I don't want to waste too much time with methodology and the technicalities of it. If you'd like to know the methodology, I'm quite willing to send you the documentation that shows what we do. But effectively, once a year for the last 10 years, we've sent out as many emails as we possibly can to as many South Africans as we possibly can and asked them as many questions as we possibly can. So it's kind of like we used to call it AMPs for rich people. The reason for the rich people filter, I'll explain to you now exactly where we position ourselves. But effectively, we're trying to understand three things about people: who they are, so things like life stage and life cycle and where are you at in life, how they behave as consumers, and then crucially the bit at the end with media, print, television, mobile, internet, how you can reach them. So we're not really in the quantification game, that's other people's jobs. We're here to try and understand kind of what's making people tick, what's going on like behind the scenes, because we live in this world where I think we're very, very data rich and kind of insight poor. And it's nobody's fault. It's just naturally what happens. I couldn't help laughing at this. It happens to be one of my more admired newscasters. So I have blanked out who it is just to protect their integrity. But you know, when you're watching something like the news and you see this earth-shattering statement that the coronavirus pandemic has reduced life expectancy in South Africa, the analyst in me and the thinking person kind of goes, really, is that, you know, what is that? And there's quite a lot of this around. So we try to do the opposite. We're not really trying to state facts. We're trying to work out what's the next level question, like what drives people's behavior. When we say people, very importantly, everything I'm about to show you is only a view of a specific section of South African society. We are 100% online with our research, and we specifically eliminate people who take the survey who live in households earning under 10,000 Rand a month or more. Here's why. This is what South African society looks like. This is the pyramid of inequality. We earn 2.7 trillion Rand a year, and the bottom 70% of adults in this country live in households earning less than 10,000 Rand a month. That's an enormous number of people. it's kind of vital to our well-being that we find a way of looking after these people. They're pretty desperate and pretty struggling. They were the people running away with sacks of rice over their shoulders because they knew it was going to feed their family. This is a struggling group, and we really need to concentrate on them. But we know quite a bit about them anyway, and on a consumer level, they're responsible for about 400 billion rand of the take-home pay in this country. Then we've got the middle class, another 9.5 million adults who live in what we call middle class households. They take home about 900 billion rand. And then there's this tiny group at the top, 5% of the adult population, 2.5 million adults living in the top million households in this country who take home more than half of all household income. So what we do at BrandMapp is unashamedly, we study and survey, and we become specialists in understanding behavior in this top piece of the triangle. So this is the 12 million adults in this country who pay 100% of personal tax, who earn about 80% of all the money that's earned in the country, and therefore effectively can spend about 80% of the money. It's a vital sector. You know, this is kind of like it's the engine at the front of a very long train. And if it's not chugging along, then we're in trouble. So, and also if you're selling premium goods, or you're selling anything close to a premium good, that's kind of where you want to look, right? So that's what we do. That's our BrandMapp universe, and it's how we understand this country that we live in. Which brings me to my sort of starting point. I thought I was trying to find an intro to try and explain why we think that what happens in people's hearts and minds is almost as important as transactional data, right? So you can find out exactly how many people are buying a certain product if you have access to the back end of a major retailer's dashboard. But there are these other things that are happening, the things that drive consumer behavior that are kind of classic marketing speak, you know, the red colored packaging versus the blue colored packaging, all of that sort of psycho babble. We really believe it's hugely important in understanding your consumer better, therefore being able to communicate and message better and service them better. So this whole idea of this country, I spoke to a really good friend of mine, Duncan, and I said how a lot of what we speak about is they're quite hard things. We struggle with issues like race and ethnicity and income. And I said to him, how can we tell these stories about this country in a positive way so that we can be, you know, agents of positive change? And he was hilarious because he said to me, well, the first thing you can do is maybe stop saying that. How about if you start saying our country instead of this country? Because isn't it amazing how people do it? And we then went into 20 minutes of talking about it, during which time he brake checked me about 4 times. And during the course of this presentation, you'll probably hear me saying this country, not our country. But wouldn't it be an amazing change if we collectively could stop doing this, could stop talking about this country, because it sort of puts the problem onto somebody else, and it's indicative of people who feel very disenfranchised from the concept of country, right? In fact, I thought if we really wanted to make a change, instead chuck away the swear jar at your home and put an our country jar there. So every time you say this country instead of our country, you have to put $5 in. If we did this, I think we'd probably solve our poverty problem in about 6 months. Anyway, think about it, try it. Why is it important? Well, if you understand that mechanism of a huge number of people who will say this country is indicative of a mindset. So if you're a marketer and you're trying to tap into people's sort of the zeitgeist, you'd probably think twice about selling a logo that's something as simple as proudly South African. You know, who are you selling into? Are you selling into a bunch of people who are proudly South African? It's a little bit like I was in the music industry for a long time, and I was there when the whole sort of local is lekker thing came out. And it was deeply questionable for us because, you know, on one level, local actually wasn't that lekker. The actual music that we were making in the 80s and 90s sounded distinctly local, not for good reasons. But secondly, no one bothered to ask the artists because a lot of artists just wanted to be recognized as global musical citizens, not South African music citizens, right? And these sort of examples, you'll find them everywhere. You know, when you put a Made in South Africa sticker on something, do you really know that you're tapping into sort of an emotional feeling that's going to connect with your consumer? We're very good at bashing logos and stickers and messaging in the world of marketing. This is one of my favorites. I've specifically taken out the manufacturer's name because I didn't want to embarrass all this. But this is from a few years ago. And I just thought, if this doesn't show what happens when a marketing department gets out of control, because remember that this particular retailer has a highly educated, highly engaged, highly sophisticated market. And yet they still think that putting the words new and improved on a bottle of 100% apple juice is going to sell more apple juice. I think it's troubling that. I mean, it's troubling in so many ways. First of all, how do you improve 100%? And also, what is the recipe behind 100% apple juice? Anyway, don't let me get stuck onto the 100% apple juice. There are many instances of this that we'll see coming through in the next couple of years and for the rest of our lives. Right now, the big one, of course, eco-friendliness. So this is something we can make a particular example of. So eco-friendliness, we all know that the planet is in pretty serious trouble. We all know that we need to be doing as much as possible. But it's important before you go and start pushing things down people's throats that you understand what the particular circumstances of any social group or consumer group are. So, we live in this world, not this country, where we have things like, the cotton buds. We're now having disposable, biodegradable bamboo cotton buds. We're having flip-flops made out of hemp pushed at us. There are even people making waffle irons that create spoons that are edible, so you don't have to use plastic spoons. They've invented something called flaxstick. Flaxstick, it's a plastic-type product made that can do almost exactly what you can do with plastic, but it's made out of flaxseed oil. Not even the silkworms have escaped the kind of the eco powers. We're now making dental floss with something called candelilla wax, whatever that is. Dental floss out of silk. And this is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. We definitely need to do everything we can to save the planet. But I'm just not sure that at the price point that these products come in, that they're that viable in a consumer society like South Africa. So before you start pushing eco-friendly goods and trying to push them on a consumer public, maybe you should ask a question. What do people think about eco products anyway? Well, we actually did that in BrandMapp this year. We've done it for the last couple of years, and it's a bit sad in some ways, but it's also damn interesting that only 14% of people ticked a box to say, I make an effort to buy eco-friendly goods. That's not even that committal, right? That's like, I make an effort, not I buy eco-friendly goods wherever and whenever possible. Just I make an effort. Even when I put an age filter on that, the under 25s are the most likely, and even they are less than 1 in 5 people. So you've got to start trying to understand what's going on here. Why is this a rejection of eco-friendliness as a philosophy? No, I think it's that we live in a country where, quite honestly, the number of people who can afford to floss their teeth with silk is quite small. It's like the Beyond Burger costs 5 times more than normal mints. So this is knowing these kind of things would probably make you more confident about selling, novelty goods in the eco space than the eco-friendly goods themselves. All right. This is the mechanism that I'm going to try and share a little bit of thinking or some results with you today. This idea that if we know what's going on in people's hearts and minds, maybe it can change just the way that we market and how we approach our marketing. In BrandMapp, in the interrogation, there's 220 odd questions. This is the first page of the index. And what I've done is I just try to highlight in the whole interrogation, what are the measures that are what I would call slightly psychographic, or trying to measure a headspace, a second level. So if you look down employment, for example, it's all very well to know whether somebody's employed or unemployed or a student. It's great to know what business they're in, what industry role they're in. But then the moment you add that little question in about how much do you enjoy your job, suddenly you can start cross-referencing and telling some really powerful stories. And that's why we put in as much of these kind of psychographic or mental mind and heart state questions as we can. That's what they look like in the first half of the interrogation. The second half is sort of more about your behavior and about media and stuff. So we've got a few interesting things in there. Shopping and grocery, I'll show you at the end of the presentation. I've got a couple of slides there to show you just how powerful. It's all very well saying, where do you shop for groceries? But if I can ask you why you shop, there, then suddenly I can almost produce an entire kind of report just based on 2 questions. So that's why we put all of that stuff in. And I'm going to share a couple of those things with you today. So first of all, let's start with, what are the voices in their head saying? My friend Kim Saville always used to say, "Are the voices in my head bothering you?" And I think the South African consumer has a lot of loud voices in their head right now. So we've, those of you who read some of the media and marketing press will know that we've had a story out for the last couple of weeks, just trying to explain how traumatized we are as South Africans. And if you saw the first presentation, you'll remember the slide where we showed that crime, corruption, and government incompetence are more likely to keep people awake in this country than COVID. So we have some serious things going on in our lives. And one of the places where we see it, just the first kind of litmus test of what's going on in people's minds, is this idea of immigration. So we've always asked this question about how likely are you to immigrate from South Africa in the next 5 years? And in total, we find 27% of people tick that box saying likely or very likely. Now, that's a hell of a lot of people. Whether or not they're able to is a completely different question. But the fact that there's just an appetite, the fact that that you're given half a chance to answer that question, almost a third of people will say no, likely or very likely. That's deeply troubling. This is an unsettled group of people. It's even worse when I put an age filter on. So this is typical of what I'm going to be sharing with you, this format. I call it an infographic because an infographic is something that is supposed to take complex data and express it in a simplified form so it's easier to understand. And I've never found a better one than a bar chart. So what this is there's the question, and then along the top you can see my index, and what this is showing you is the light gray bar are very young people, and the far right yellow bar or mustardy bar is older people. Ask the same question: how radical is it that 48% of young people answering our survey, 48% said I'm likely or very likely? And the question here isn't to go and work for a few years or to go on holiday. The question is to leave South Africa and go and live in another country. So the appetite from our youth is quite hectic. Our young people are properly disillusioned. And although I try to avoid the difficulties of race and ethnicity as much as possible, I also think this is very important that we understand that this is not an issue of race. It's a race to leave. I ran a little quick chart here where I created some cohorts. So young Black people under the age of 25 and young non-Black people versus the millennial groups in those same ethnicities. And isn't it radical that actually right now, young Black people who self-identify as Black are more likely to tick the I'd like to immigrate box than non-Black people. I think it's hectic, guys. We need to do something in this country to try and keep our young people engaged. Part of the problem is that not only are they living hectic lives, these youngsters, and they're aware, they're educated and they're aware of what's going on. So their future economic prospects have got nothing to do with nationality, feelings of partisanship. It's purely got to do with I've got an education and I want to do something with it and I want to live a life. And they're looking overseas. Here's a really interesting sort of in-depth look into their hearts. Part of it's a separate sort of standalone project within BrandMapp this year. We're working with a company called the Resilience Factory to try and unpack this idea of personal resilience. Like how can people, what sort of people are able to bounce back when things happen and create sort of armor to deal with what life throws at you. So we put a whole bunch of questions in, and this is just an extract of them, just to show you kind of an interesting little emotional story. So Gen Z, the youngest people are the white bars, and the older people are Gen X, the yellow bar at the end. The story here is quite simply, so the older you get, the much more likely you are to be able to stay calm in a crisis. The younger you are, the more likely you are to not want to talk about your feelings, the more likely you are to not be able to recover when bad things happen. And the net result is that 23% of those young people tick a box to say, I sometimes feel life's not worth living. I'm like, for me, that's just I just feel like if my arms are big enough, I feel like I want to just, give everybody under the age of 25 in South Africa a massive hug and tell them that, start singing Pink songs about the world's been spinning since the beginning. Something needs to happen here, but understanding that those are your consumers of today and tomorrow. And understanding that they're living fairly traumatized, fairly hectic lives, I think is quite important before you start working out, how to market to them. Equally important, though, is that despite all of it, we put a measure in, which is quite simply asking, in general, how happy are you now? It's a very random way of asking the question, but it produces some really interesting results because it's a Likert scale. So it's very unhappy, I'm okay, happy, very unhappy. Okay. So there are scales. I've just composited the groups together. And the fact of the matter is that despite everything, people are very resistant to tick an I'm unhappy box. In fact, more people are happy than even okay, than just say okay. And crucially, the older you get, the happier you are likely to be. I guess that's because I'm still alive and I'm retired, and that's a much easier place for a lot of people to be happy than I'm young and I'm facing this incredible unknown world. So the good news here is that on a general happiness level, people are still, it's almost like I'm happy about me. I'm just not necessarily that happy about the world. And I think we need to do something about that as a society to try and change the way people think. Within all of that, obviously, you want people to feel good, and you want people to want to live life. As marketers of brands, and if you're selling anything, you want. Come on, you want people to feel okay. So we also measure things like this, like which of these things do you hope to do in the next year? And I thought this is super interesting because one of the bonuses of BrandMapp 2021 is we stayed out of field for a very long time. So we actually have a before and after view of pre-COVID, post-COVID. So I'm loving some of the trend stuff. If you listen to the first seminar, you'll see how some of those big shifts were like really important and meaningful to understand consumers. So I love these ones as well. I mean, this is a lot of the stuff we ask in here, like, are you going to retire or graduate, or those metrics have stayed the same. And you can see getting a new job's actually stayed the same as well. I think people are pretty happy just to have the job they've got right now. But look at the things that have changed. I think that staying at home maybe made us a little bit frustrated. The car thing is interesting because people just didn't buy a car because I think they didn't want to make that move, not because they didn't have the money. It just didn't feel like the timing was right last year. So it's interesting that more people will tick that box. I love the starting a new business rise because we definitely see a lot more slashes coming out of COVID. If you don't want to start your own business, starting your own business doesn't necessarily mean I want to quit my job. It just means I want to start my own thing that I can control a little bit more. Buying a house up, not very much. Renovating my house or kitchen, beautiful one. Hands up everybody who. I know I'm only a case study of one, but we certainly repainted the bedroom. So I love this idea of renovating house, kitchen. This speaks very much to me about that nest economy idea. Like, we're spending a lot more time at home. We've spent a lot more time at home, and what happens at home is going to become increasingly important. There's this little quick snapshot of some stuff that's going on in people's heads. How does all of that affect, though, what's going on, in their hearts and what we know that people really care about? So there's a big fat section in our interrogation, which we originally called the Ubuntu section. So it's just trying to understand what causes people are attracted to. What do they care about in general? And one of the first questions we ask is trying to understand a kind of a geospecificity about people's what people care about. And it's a beautiful chart, this, especially given what we've just seen. I'm sure like me, you were pretty traumatized by what happened in our country in the last couple of weeks. And there was this weird moment for me where I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to feel happy or sad about the pictures of these communities coming together to sweep the streets and rebuild. But wow, what an amazing story about the hearts and minds of a country when people will do that. And when we ask this geo-specific cause-based question, it's quite amazing. It's almost like seeing the rings of an onion and seeing which ones are more important and which ones aren't. So 47% of people, the box people are most likely to tick is causes that have a direct effect in my everyday life. And the second biggest one is causes in my suburb and where I work. So the stuff that happens in our immediate community is what's most important. And then the next important thing, by quite a margin, is my country. Well before my city or my province, it's my country. So in a way, one of the things that we witnessed was that this idea of how resilient can we be as a country. I hope I'm right in making this assumption, but I hope that what we saw and what this chart proves is that we do have the ability to come together as communities in this country because we care in this order. We care about the people around us first, and then our country. Sticking in the same cause-based area, so now we're getting into a little bit more nitty-gritty. This is a story we've been telling increasingly over the last 10 years, that it's a simple question. We offer a whole bunch of things. There's more than this is just an edited group. What are the things that you care, the causes that you believe deserve the most support? And you can pick 3, so it auto ranks in the final results. 68% of people tick education. By a country mile, the thing that most people will tick. By a country mile. I mean, with poverty at 39, look how low on everybody's scale things like food security and housing and press freedom, almost nowhere. The thing that's on our mind is education, and it's because educated people know the value of education. If we can solve the education problem, we can pretty much solve all the rest. I think that's what most educated people will feel and argue. Interestingly, though, only about 35% of people, when asked the next question, which is which of these causes do you support, only about 35% of people tick the education box, and it's the most ticked box as well. So funny enough, we actually, here's a real next level question. 2 years ago, we were all sitting around before we went to field and thinking, what do they do that makes them feel like they're supporting education? My theory was they've all got my school cards and they're ticking education because of that. So we actually did ask the question again. And here's the result. So it turns out that actually 40% of those people said it's a my school card. But there was something else really interesting that came out, and that is this little group here of 24% of people. And at the bottom, another 5% of people. These are people who say, I support education by paying school fees for a child who's not my own. So at the risk of giving away my predilection for whiskey, it reminded me of that lovely series of sexist ads, Give That Man a Bells, run by Bell's Whiskey a few years ago. Now the modern version would be, Give That Woman a Bells, quite correctly. But I think it's really interesting because if corporate South Africa could just find a way of identifying these people properly and rewarding the hell out of them for that behavior, it turns out to be about 10% of the middle class. And up. And I've done the cross-reference, and it's not a bunch of retired people. It really genuinely is people who feel strongly enough to pay for other children's education who can't afford it. We need to find these people and reward the hell out of them. And I think there's an opportunity for corporate South Africa to do that. Mainly because I'm a little skeptical, not about CSI, but we know that I think last year that's a 2020, it's a 2019 spend. I don't think they released the 2020 figure. We're talking about somewhere between 10 and 11 billion rand a year is what corporate South Africa spends on CSI. And it's amazing that they do it. It's amazing that they've found ways of doing it and creating projects. But it's a bit sad that when we ask this question in BrandMapp, so how important is it to you as a consumer that companies give back to society? This is what the results look like. So I've trended this 2019, 2020, 21, just to show you that this mood hasn't changed a lot. And if it has, if anything, it's people have got a little bit more ambivalent towards how important companies giving back is. The message here is that, on the far left is I just don't care, and on the far right is I'll actively work against. So it looks like the actively work against people, the activists don't care quite as much as they used to. What's amazing to me, though, is that I look at that little area as that's the actually give a damn zone. The stuff on the left, where I can, I try to support companies actively give back. It's like properly non-committal, where I try to. They're not doing anything. Companies should give back, but it doesn't affect the brands I support. Well, that's at least honest. So what it means is that with all of this money spent on CSI, it feels like it isn't kind of filtering down to really having an impact in the general consumer mind. And I think there's a massive opportunity there, because if people cared more about these kind of things, maybe it would change our behavior in a good way, Yeah, so So just worry about the actually give a damn zone. I think we should be caring a hell of a lot more, because there are a lot of things that these people, that we as the middle class and up in South Africa do care about. So we track this every year. Simple question: which of these hobbies and pastimes are you interested in? And we always find that music and movies and cooking and reading come out like way top. And then there's kind of like this big drop down to other things in life. But it's kind of an interesting way, obviously, when you segment this and look at different groups of people, and it changes quite a lot. What's interesting here is that year on year, 2020 to 2021, not a radical amount of change. Going to the cinema went the wrong way for obvious reasons. I think people probably are less interested. They're going to be less interested in the immediate aftermath. But everything else is kind of roughly the same, and a couple of % here and there. But there were a few places where we saw some pretty radical changes 2020 to 2021. So working from the bottom up, I mean, I love the idea of people being more interested in bird watching. It's like, well, I'm sitting at home, I finally realized there are birds in my garden. And for the first time, I'm asking, what are they? What is that bird? It's a bit of a silly one. DIY woodwork, much more importantly, you know, it doesn't surprise me that there would be a fair rise in that. I don't know about you guys, but I personally spent far too much money at Builders Warehouse during lockdown. It felt I was building stuff I didn't even need. Love the idea of wine tasting at clubs. Just shows how much we did, you know, miss wine. I think the moment you put the word wine somewhere, or alcohol or whatever, people are going to tick the box because we missed it. Yes, we do have a collective problem. Love the gardening slide, you know, just like so much more important to me. Although the people who are fortunate enough to have gardens just spent a heck of a lot more time in their gardens. Home decor ties back into that slide I showed you earlier. And then really importantly is this idea of travel. So it's definitely one of the big kind of stories that we see sitting inside BrandMapp. We've always measured travel as being this thing that is really, really close to the hearts and minds of the South African middle class, the more privileged sector of South African society. But lockdown just made it even more so. You know, it's a fairly significant shift there. And there are other places in the data where we see this proven. The first place was this, you know, what is the one thing that you think we missed more than Zol and booze? I'll tell you what it was. It was getting onto an airplane. So obviously we had to change a few questions in BrandMapp. We always ask which sorts of flights have you taken in the past year? This year, when we were in field after lockdown, we obviously had to say, which of the following flights do you expect to take? So this is very cool because we've got a metric of known past behavior, and we can match it up with future appetite. And we can do the same thing with the restaurant industries and a few other places in the data. We've got this nice metric now that goes, what did I do and what would I like to do? So in absolute, that looks really interesting. You know, 60% of people ticking a box to say, I expect to take a flight for a holiday in the coming year. 30% of people, 29%, saying an international flight for holiday and leisure. So these are big numbers, you know. So does it mean they can and does it mean they will? No, but it means that the appetite is definitely there. And what's really interesting is when you put that figure from the previous data set in. So what was the past behavior? And this is what we find. So domestic flight for business, almost not surprisingly, is down. So 22% of people took domestic flights for business. Now only 18% of people think they will. The main reason for that is what we're doing right now, right? I mean, under normal circumstances, I would probably be in a lecture room somewhere in Johannesburg, having paid for a flight, paid for a hire car or an Uber account. I would have had a fabulously expensive bottle of wine with my lunch. It would have cost me a fortune. So I think a lot of businesses are going to stay in this, like in the Zoom room. You know, it makes sense. 40% of people last time around said they had taken a domestic flight for leisure. 60% say they want to. And look at the international flights, you know, from 17% known did fly overseas to 29% saying I want to. If there's one thing that I think, if there's one industry that should prime itself, and if there's one thing that you can really tug on consumer hearts with in this segment, it's travel. It's just such a massively important thing in these people's lives. So similar to travel then, what are the other kind of major behavioral things that we know of? Well, I wondered, like super spreader events, you know, so a couple of years ago, for the first time, we put in a question about, you know, what sort of events do you go to? And we were amazed at the rise of food markets. You know, that in the middle class and up, food markets had suddenly become a huge sort of thing in people's lives. And as the years have gone on, we've put in more and more events just to try and track behavior. So this is another 2020 versus 2021. So another one of the, which of these events have you attended versus which of these would you like to attend? And I think these are pretty spectacular results. So the food market thing is totally understandable. It was known behavior anyway, and people just want to go back to the food market. And the same thing applies for live music concerts. The outdoor music festival up quite substantially. I guess that's there's a sense of longing involved in that. Live sports events, no change. So no change in some of them, but wow, I mean, food and wine festival, again, you know, you put eating and drinking, it's like, geez, we must eating and drinking a lot. And you give me half a chance someone tick the box. I also think that the 19 to 33% business conference on Durban is significant. I do think that while this is amazing that we can have that 200 of us can all join in on an event like this online, it's amazing we can do it from all over the country and we can save some costs. But there's a lot to be said for interpersonal networking, and I think we do generally miss it as people, as human beings. We must be missing it. Otherwise, there's something wrong with us. Otherwise, we're psychopathic. So I think there's a definite desire, and that's really important, because when things do open up again, putting on the right events that people want to go to for the right reasons and making that human connection, it definitely shows that there's appetite. And of course, a home decor exhibition, because we've already established everyone's looking for new patio furniture. Okay, so that's a quick little whistle stop around some of the stuff going on in people's hearts. And I thought I'd just tie it up for you and talk about a primary behavior driver. So there's lots of reasons that the hearts and minds thing start giving you some indication of the motivation that people have for the way they behave. But when it comes to shopping in particular, we ask very specific questions in BrandMapp, and it's all trying to kind of peel away the layers and go like, what's driving you? Are you price conscious? Are you value conscious? Are you into image? All those kind of things. There's a lot that sits in the data set with interrogation about that. And one of the first places we always try to start when we consult with clients is guys, we as a marketing and branding and community tend to think that the answers are really intricate and difficult. And a lot of the time the answers are like absolutely sort of in your face. So sometimes the obvious answer is the answer. And this is a great example. We did some work in the fuel industry years ago, and I loved the attitude of the competing fuel companies, because they were adamant that it was hugely important to people, what fuel they were buying, the actual fuel. And I prefer the fuel. So we asked the question, and actually, I think my point was proved right, that the reason you fill up with fuel where you fill up with fuel is because it's convenient, because it's right on next door, or it's next to your office, or it's on the way to the office, or even because it's on the right side of the road on your way to or from work, which is a huge issue. So all that we proved was that actually when it comes to fuel, location is the most important thing. So applying this thinking, then what happens when you look at something like grocery shopping, which is, obviously our behavior changed quite drastically. Everybody thinks during lockdown, it changed because we were shopping a lot more. And also I think we were shopping a lot closer to home, which is interesting in itself. So I just want to sort of take you back in time. In 2015, we did a really interesting piece of research called the SA Shopper Survey, also about 25,000 respondents. And I always remember this one chart where we said, how far are you prepared to go traveling for clothes shopping versus grocery shopping? It's kind of instinctive. You kind of think you know this, but all we proved was that when it comes to grocery shopping, people are far less inclined to travel, more than 5Ks. Clothing, I'll go halfway across the blooming country to go and get the pair of jeans that I want, but grocery, not so much, So it inspired us a long time ago to start really digging into the segment. We love the grocery segment. It's fabulous because you can find out some very interesting things very quickly. So we ask a whole lot of questions like, where do you shop most often for groceries? Where do you also shop? Where do you bulk shop, etc.? And then we ask a question, once you've said, I shop most at Pick n Pay or Checkers, we say, well, why do you shop there most often for groceries? Okay. And it's just going to give us a really it's a scalpel to use against consumer groups to try and work out what is important to different consumers. And this is what we find in total. So in the total group, 48% of people tick the box to say have the most convenient location. So convenience, like where the store is and convenient is the thing that's most on people's mind. Then lowest price. Okay, so even though this is the middle class and up, even though these people have money, price and convenience are the two things that are absolutely top of mind. The cynic in me wants to say, well, let's just face facts. It essentially means we're all a bunch of lazy people looking for a good deal. And that may be true sort of in general or on average. But what's really interesting about this, as I said, is if you have access to a crosstab tool, a Telmar type tool, and you can go in and you can start running metrics like this against different consumer groups, the stories that come out start like becoming really fascinating. So what happens, for example, if I take those metrics against a Woolworths group, and what you see is a completely different picture, then you go like, what about if I compare the Woolworths group to the Pick and Pay group? And all of a sudden, these kind of these very, very simple but very powerful stories start coming out. The fact that a Woolworths consumer is like completely obsessed with quality, almost to the expense of everything else. Look at lowest price. I'm just absolutely nowhere. Versus your Pick and Pay supermarket, most often or most frequent shopper, where it's a completely different story. They're not just lazy people. They're lazy people who want to be rewarded for being lazy. I'm joking. No, but suddenly the loyalty program off the charts, certainly against most other retailers. So sometimes these graphs are worth 1,000 words. And I suppose the story in here really is that all consumers are not made equal. And the crazy thing about these charts is that if I showed you the demographics of these two groups of people, they're almost the same. These are the people who drive the same cars, often work in the same jobs, mostly earn the same amount of money. It's just that you've got some people for whom different things are very different to another group. So the guys on the left are going to give a damn about some imported ancient grain pasta for $150 a packet, whereas the guys on the right are going to be a lot more concerned about whether or not they'll get a good deal on the pasta that they normally buy, and is it convenient for me to get there? So if we can start understanding that consumers are not all made the same, sometimes the stories are not obvious. I love the food lovers market version of that graph, because look how different they are to the average, and look how different they are to those two groups that we just showed you. So this is a really interesting group of people who they are more likely to tick value for money and special offer than price. So how interesting to find a group of consumers who clearly have that value, not price, in their heads. Okay, so that's the sort of my big behavioral issue. I really do think that we live in a country where we need to understand that consumers are highly pressurized, and the idea of convenience and the idea of price and value, they dominate so much of our thinking and our behavior. So what's the take home of all of this? Well, I hope I haven't been going too fast, and obviously this is a strange challenge. It's a bit like, I'm trying to explain the dictionary to you, because sitting inside 9 million odd data points, you can imagine there's an enormous amount. So hopefully I've given you just a couple of interesting things there that will make you even more interesting at your next dinner party. But what's a big take-home message that I can leave you with? Well, here it is. The first thing I do if I was, I'd go and Google a woman called Katerina Kamprani. She's a Greek artist. And I found her work about 10 years ago, and I absolutely love it. She spent a long time creating and designing these everyday goods that were just uncomfortable, that made you feel incredibly awkward. And for anybody with ADT or any sort of anxiety disorder, just looking at the picture and imagining trying to use it is enough to drive you mad. I feel deeply uncomfortable looking at these pictures and trying to imagine what would happen if I had to try and use one of these things that she's developed. There's nothing other than anxiety going on when I look at these. And the message here is, she's doing this because she's tapping into this idea that as consumers and as people, we're quite drawn to things that make us feel more comfortable, and we almost have a physical reaction to things that make us feel uncomfortable. So life as a consumer, for me, it's just like international travel. International travel is incredibly exciting, but man, it's uncomfortable. And if I could just find one airline that would walk up to me and give me an inflatable neck pillow and offer me a sleeping tablet, I'd fly with them for the rest of my life, man. They'd have me sold completely. And I think that this is the key to understanding where we're at in South Africa right now. Can't speak for the rest of the world, but I think the South African consumer, given the fact that we're fairly traumatized, given the fact that we're under economic pressure, but in this group in particular, who still have money, who still have, they're lucky, they're privileged that they have disposable income. The thing that you should do, you should wake up every morning and put this up on the wall of your office and say, this is what's in your consumer's mind. Your consumer is sitting there thinking, just make my life easier, not more difficult. If that drives your consumer thinking, and if it drives your strategy, then I think we'll probably be in a much happier place, and you'll be doing better business. So that's what I think is happening in the consumer's hearts and minds. I hope you all took something out of that. I managed to get in with 3 minutes to spare. Yeah, and we'll be, I think this has been videoed, so if you'd like to share it with anybody, please feel free.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you so much, Brandon, for another colorful journey. I think you did a great job out of those 9 million data points you measured. So thank goodness you have all the insights and statistics at your fingertips. We have a few questions from Ginny. There's a question on why you shop at X store for groceries. Is that the primary store?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So we ask that about it's where you shop most often for groceries. Why do you shop there most often? Yeah, it would be
okay.
The nature of, just importantly, like many of the data sets that will be available on Telmar, a data set's only as good as it is. We can only answer the questions that we can answer. So if you can imagine, there's 230 questions asked in the whole survey. If we started asking people like, oh, and the places you also shop at, because most people shop at about 5 or 6, but why do you shop there as well? It would take you 5.5 hours just to finish the grocery interrogation. So yes, sure. The question we ask is specific. It's your most often shopped store. Why do you shop there?
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then Alan has a question. Why was exercise not included in hobbies?
Exercise is completely included in hobbies. It's its own section. The way we ask exercise is not really a hobby. We ask, which sports are you interested in? Which sports and hobbies are you interested in? And one of those options, we've got walking and hiking and gym, etc. And then we ask a second question, which is, which of those ones that you're interested in do you actually participate in? So we can measure people's activities across exercise sort of segments.
Thank you. And then another question from Julie. I'm a marketing intern learning a lot about marketing. How would a marketer use these data insights to market better?
How would a marketer use these insights? Okay, so it's a good question, but it's super simple. We're in the business really of trying to add value to people's thinking. The quality of thinking is what underpins all decision making. You can't decide to do anything without thinking deeply about it and making a good decision about what to do strategically or tactically. So the reason we got involved in BrandMapp in the first place is we're not trying to be clever. We're trying to help people start in the right place. So if you're in the world of marketing, and for example, somebody has a sort of an anecdotal starting point, like, everybody wants to buy eco-friendly goods. Imagine if you don't have a data set or any data point to start that discussion on. You'll just sit there all quietly in the back of the room and take it for granted that the person who said that is correct. And then 6 months later, you would have put all of your marketing budget into eco-friendly goods, only to discover that only 14% of people actually care. So the point of data is to start your thinking in a better place and to add value to your quality of thinking. That's all it is. That's all it's for.
Excellent. And also to add, Julie, those 9 million data points do need massaging, and you need to find the nuggets like Brandon has as a storyteller. And obviously the cost tab and statistical, it's quite an easy insights package and statistics, but that is what one has to use because there is so much data. You have to make sense of the tsunami of data coming at you. So thank you, Brandon. There was one other question. Brandon, with the probability of people leaving, what happens to the housing market? Do you think it will remain flat?
Ooh, controversial. Yeah, so look, just remember that whole idea of people leaving, we know what the actual figures are, right? About 20,000 people are leaving this country every year. And it's, as I said, it's not a race issue. I can assure you what it is it's a wealth issue. It's not about creed or color. It's about your education level, about whether you can afford to leave. So at the moment, those 20,000 people, by definition, will only be coming out of the super wealthy. So we're losing taxpayers, and we're losing a hell of a valuable taxpayers. And I do think it will. I think the housing market's definitely going to be affected. I think it's a bit knee-jerk, though, to go like, well, everything's absolutely stuffed, because to be honest with you, there's just not that many people who can afford the 3 to 5 million rand buy-in to a European passport right now. It's not going to happen overnight, this thing. I think the housing market's probably that's a whole different ballgame, and I'm not a specialist in it, but I definitely do think that the housing market's been over-indexed for a long time. I mean, I think that the various bubbles we've been through, it's almost like we're in a moment of self-correction. Is a matchbox in the middle of the city of Cape Town really worth 1.9 million rand? A place where you can't have friends around for dinner? I don't know. So I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not a housing expert. I would think that the major effect won't be felt until, you need a hell of a lot more people to leave the country for immigration to be the direct effect on the real estate market. Unless you're in like Houghton or, Bishop's Court Hill in Cape Town, then it's different, maybe, yeah.
Thank you. That was really great. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for all of you delegates who joined today. We have another data webinar on the 26th of August, and this will go through changes in the media landscape. I've seen a few. Brandon's given me a sneak preview, and you really want to see these changes. So join us on the 26th of August, please. Elke will be sending out the invite. So thank you for your time. To end off, we have a little 2-minute video showcasing our Telmar Insights and Statistics package, which Elke will play for us. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks very much, everybody.